Her children could not walk anymore. Her husband was 12 days in the ground, and the banker had already taken everything. Clara stood in the doorway holding a baby too weak to cry, watching her 3-year-old son's legs curl like dry twigs beneath him. She was ready to die. Then a rider appeared through the dead cottonwoods. A stranger with gray eyes and a closed door he never opened. He saved her children that winter, but she was about to discover why he needed saving too. Wheeler County, Texas. Winter of 1934. The sky had no softness left in it. Clara Weston stood in the doorway of what used to be her home, a baby on her hip and 3 children at her feet staring out across nothing. No smoke rose from the neighbor's chimney across the pasture. No dog barked in the distance, just the rasp of wind through the fence wires and the sound of Pearl fussing against her shoulder, too tired and hungry and cold to cry properly anymore. 12 days. That was how long her husband had been in the ground. Walter lay buried at the edge of the back field where the fence leaned like an old man without his cane. She had dug that grave herself, her hands cracking and bleeding against the frozen earth because there was no one else to do it. No neighbors left, no family within 100 miles, just her and 4 children, and a world that had forgotten they existed. The wind cut through the gaps in the doorframe. It found every hole in her coat, every tear in her stockings. It crept into her bones and stayed there a cold that no fire could chase away. She had not eaten that morning, had not eaten the night before. There was half a jar of flour left in the kitchen, and nothing in the cellar but spoiled potatoes and a tin of lard she could not bring herself to open. Opening it meant admitting how close they were to the end. Behind her, the stove barely glowed. She had spent most of the night rocking Pearl by its fading warmth, listening to little Emmett's chest rattle when he breathed. The children did not complain anymore. They were too tired for that. Even Nettie, who used to beg for songs at bedtime, had gone silent 3 days ago. But it was Colton who frightened her most. The boy was 3 years old. He had stopped crawling 4 days back. His legs curled under him like dry twigs whenever she set him down, and no amount of rubbing or warming could straighten them. Something inside him was giving up. Something that should have kept growing had decided there was no point. Clara looked down at her children now. Emmett, the oldest at 8, stood beside his brother and sister, with shoulders that should not have known such weight. He had tried to carry Colton yesterday, but his own legs had buckled beneath him. The boy was strong in spirit, but his body was failing just like the rest of them. Nettie sat on the porch step, her eyes fixed on something in the distance that was not there. She was 5 years old and had not spoken a complete sentence in over a week. The girl who used to sing to the chickens now moved through the world like a ghost. And Pearl, sweet Pearl, 8 months old and too quiet. Babies were supposed to cry. This one had learned that crying brought nothing. Clara's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her hands were raw and red from carrying water and splitting wood with a hatchet too dull to cut through anything but her will. She was not a woman prone to despair. She had survived a childhood of poverty, a father who drank, a mother who died too young. She had built a life with Walter through drought and dust and disappointment. But this was different. This was the end of everything. The man from the bank had come 3 days after the funeral. Harlan Creedy with his slicked hair and his eyes that never quite met hers. He had stood on this very porch and told her the house was not hers anymore. The mortgage was in default. The land would be reclaimed. He said she could stay a while longer, like it was a kindness. Like letting a woman and 4 children freeze to death slowly was somehow better than throwing them out all at once. She had nodded, closed the door in his face, cried until her body had nothing left to give. But she did not cry now. Now there was only the wind and the cold and the terrible mathematics of survival. 8 miles to Shamrock, 4 children who could barely walk. No horse, no wagon, no money, no hope. She had calculated it 100 times. Emmett might make it 2 miles on his own, Nettie perhaps 1. Colton and Pearl would have to be carried the entire way, and Clara herself had not eaten properly in 5 days. The numbers did not add up. They never would. Pearl made a soft noise against her shoulder and went limp with exhaustion. The weight of the baby made Clara sway. Such a small thing, that weight. Such a small thing to break what was left of her. Emmett tried to help Colton down the steps. His legs buckled, and he sat hard on the wood eyes, dull and empty. No tears, just that blank, hollow tiredness that did not belong on a child's face. Clara opened her mouth to tell them to go back inside, to wait for help that would never come, to pretend for a few more hours that everything would be all right. That was when she saw the rider. At first she thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light through the dead cottonwoods, a shape that her desperate mind had conjured from nothing. But it moved, deliberate, unhurried, a figure against the flat gray of the world getting closer with each passing moment. She did not call out, did not dare, just stood there with her baby slumped against her chest and her dying children at her feet, watching the shape resolve itself into something real. A horse, tall, strong-legged, broad through the chest. A man on its back wearing an oilskin coat and a felt hat pulled low against the wind. The rider reached the edge of her property and stopped, pulled the reins, sat there for a long moment just looking. His eyes found the children first, then moved to Clara, then back to the children again. Something shifted in his expression, something that might have been recognition or memory or pain. Clara straightened her arm around Pearl. She did not like being looked at, did not like the vulnerability of being seen in this state, broken and desperate and standing on the edge of surrender. But she was too tired to pretend strength she did not have. The man dismounted. He walked toward them with heavy boots, the kind that sank a little with every step in the frost-covered dust. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 35, his beard rough and unkempt, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. He had the look of a man who had been alone a long time and learned to prefer silence. When he reached the bottom of the steps, he took off his hat. His name was Silas Holloway. Clara did not know that yet, did not know anything about him except that he had stopped when no one else would, that he was standing in front of her children with something like concern in his gray eyes. The eyes were what she noticed most, pale gray like weathered stone, like sky before a storm. They held a weight that she recognized because she carried the same weight herself. This was a man who had lost something, maybe many things. "Ma'am." His voice was quiet, careful, like he did not want to frighten the children or the half-dead woman holding them together. Clara did not answer, just looked back at him, bracing herself for whatever came next. A question she could not answer, an offer she could not accept, another blow from a world that had already beaten her to the ground. But he did not ask anything. Instead, he looked at Emmett, saw the boy sitting on the steps with his legs folded under him, shivering in a coat 3 sizes too big. "You all right, son?" Emmett nodded, then shook his head. The contradiction of a child who had been taught to be brave, but had nothing left to be brave with. Silas knelt down. His coat creaked with the movement. "You look near frozen." Clara swallowed. The words came out like sand scraping against stone. "We don't need anything." It was a lie, the most obvious lie she had ever told. But pride was the only thing she had left, and she would not let it go without a fight. Silas nodded once, looked at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see everything she was trying to hide. "Reckon I can see that." Then he stood and reached for Pearl. Clara's breath caught. Every instinct told her to pull back, to protect, to refuse. But his hands were steady and his movements slow, giving her time to stop him if she wanted to. She did not stop him. He took the baby from her arms and held her against his chest like he knew exactly how to do it, like it was something he had done before a long time ago in a life that no longer existed. Pearl did not cry, just nestled against the warmth of his coat and closed her eyes. "I've got room in the wagon," he said, nodded toward the ridge behind him. "Can get you warm. Get them fed." Clara looked at her children, at Colton, whose legs had forgotten how to straighten, at Nettie, who had forgotten how to speak, at Emmett, who had forgotten how to be a child. She looked at the long, flat road that stretched toward nothing, at the house that was no longer hers, at the grave where her husband lay. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. Only the illusion of one, and even that was fading now. "All right," she whispered. Silas nodded, did not smile, did not try to comfort her with words that would have meant nothing. He simply bent down and lifted the next child. The wagon was not far. He had left it just beyond the ridge, tucked beside a stand of cedar where the wind broke and the ground softened. The horse, a thick-chested roan named Elko, was hitched to a post with a loose lead. Clara watched Silas carry her children one by one. Emmett last lifted like he weighed nothing at all. He set each of them in the wagon bed with a gentleness that made her chest ache. The bed was half covered by a canvas tarp, stiff with cold. Beneath it lay a scatter of supplies: blankets, a sack of oats, canned beans, some cured meat wrapped in paper. There were clothes, too, coats that did not match, gloves with different hands, a pair of boots that looked too small for a man but too big for a child. She noticed those boots, filed away the question they raised, did not ask. Silas worked without words, placed a folded quilt beneath the children's heads, tucked blankets around their thin bodies, checked to make sure Pearl was breathing properly. Clara walked behind him in silence. Her body was too cold to ask questions. Her mind stretched thin like old cloth pulled across a frame. But something inside her held on, cautious, stubborn, a flicker of something that refused to die even when everything else had. Silas saw it. She could tell by the way he watched her make sure every child had something covering them before she let herself climb into the wagon, by the way he handed her a blanket without expecting thanks. Best wrap that baby up tight. Wind's going to pick up come afternoon. She took the blanket without a word, not out of rudeness, out of survival. She did not have the space for manners yet, might never have the space again. She tucked Pearl into her chest and settled back against the wagon's side. Watched Silas climb onto the front bench and take the reins. The wheels groaned as they started moving. The land rolled past them slow, wide stretches of nothing. The kind of empty that could make a person feel like they had fallen out of time, like they were the last people left in a world that had forgotten how to be alive. They passed a dead windmill with its blades half torn and creaking. Beyond it, a silo had collapsed in on itself like a crushed tin can. Its metal ribs caught the gray light and held it like bones. Clara stared at the back of Silas's coat. He drove with one gloved hand, the other resting on his knee. His shoulders were broad, but not in a showy way. They were the shoulders of a man built by years of labor, shaped by lifting and carrying and enduring. She wondered how many winters he had ridden through like this, how many farms he had seen fall apart, how many women he had carried away from places like hers. "You from around here?" The question came out before she could stop it. Her voice was rough from disuse, barely louder than the creak of the wheels. He did not turn, just nodded. "North of Shamrock. Used to be cattle country. Still is if a man's stubborn enough. What's your name, Silas Holloway?" He did not offer more. She did not press. After a while, Pearl slept. The boys leaned against each other, eyes half-lidded. The warmth inside the canvas, the steady motion of the wagon, the feel of something solid beneath them. It was enough to ease the ache a little, enough to let their breathing slow. Clara kept watching Silas. The straightness of his spine, the stillness of his hands, the way he seemed to know exactly where he was going without needing to think about it. An hour passed, maybe more. The cold light softened into something close to afternoon. Clara smelled wood smoke in the air before she saw anything. Then a line of trees appeared, a sloping rise, a gate made of split cedar posts. Beyond it sat a small ranch house, simple and square, with smoke rising from a metal chimney. A barn stood off to one side, painted red so long ago that the color had faded to rust. A chicken coop, a corral with a few cattle huddled against the wind. It was not much, but it was alive. It was warm. It was real. Silas did not announce their arrival, did not need to. The children stirred as the wagon came to a stop. Emmett's eyes flickered open, took in the house, and then looked at his mother with a question he was too tired to ask. Clara had no answer for him, only the hope that this stranger's kindness was real and not another cruelty wearing a different mask. Silas climbed down first, tied Elko to a post, came around to the back of the wagon and offered his arms. Clara hesitated. "I can carry them," she said, reaching for Nettie. "You don't have to." "I know." But her hands were shaking. Silas saw it, said nothing, just took Nettie and held the door open with his foot as Clara followed behind with Pearl. The house smelled of pine and old wood. The floors creaked underfoot, worn smooth by years of boots and bare feet. The windows had been covered with thick quilts to keep out the wind. A fire burned low in the hearth, throwing a quiet orange light across the walls. "Kitchen's through there," Silas said. "Water pump out back still works, though it's stiff when it's cold. I'll bring some in." Clara nodded once, set Pearl down on a quilt near the fire, knelt beside her and loosened the baby's wrappings with fingers that had forgotten how to feel. The warmth was overwhelming. It crept into her skin like something she had not known she was missing, made her dizzy, made her eyes sting with something that was not quite tears. Behind her, Silas moved through the house, boots scuffing against floorboards, the door opening and closing, the sound of water sloshing in a pail. She heard him but did not turn, could not turn, could only kneel there beside her sleeping baby and let the fire do its work. The children did not ask questions. They were too tired to worry about where they were or why. This was a warm room. There was a fire. There was stillness. For the first time in 12 days, that was enough. Clara touched the edge of Pearl's cheek and felt it warm, alive, still fighting. A pan clanked in the kitchen. Then the smell of something cooking drifted in. Bacon, beans, some kind of fat that coated the air with promise. Her throat swelled. Her eyes burned. She did not know what this place was, did not know what kind of man Silas Holloway was or what he wanted from her. But she knew with the sharp clarity that only hunger and heartbreak can bring that he had given her children warmth when no one else would. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Just for a minute, just long enough to remember what it felt like to rest. That first night passed without words. Silas set plates out for all of them, quiet and methodical. The children ate slowly at first, cautious as deer at a stream, until Nettie let out a soft sigh and leaned against the table with crumbs stuck to her cheek. Clara cut the food into small bites, fed Pearl with her fingers, watched the other three drift toward sleep at the edges of warmth they had almost forgotten existed. Silas never sat down with them. He stayed near the stove, leaning against the counter with his arms folded, watching but not staring. His presence filled the room without demanding attention, like a mountain, like something that had always been there and always would be. Clara knew the kind of men who watched women when they thought no one was looking, men whose eyes lingered in places they should not, men who expected payment for every kindness, who kept score in ways that always came due. Silas was not one of them. His gaze went to the children more than to her, and when he did look her way there was no hunger in it, no calculation, only a kind of quiet recognition, the look of someone who had seen suffering before and understood it in ways that words could not explain. After the children were wrapped in quilts on the floor, he brought her a steaming mug, just hot water and dried peppermint leaves. Simple, warm, enough. "You ought to sleep," he said. "I will." He hesitated, seemed to want to say something else, then nodded toward the hallway. "You can take the back room. I'll stay by the fire." She looked at him for a long moment, searching for something, a sign, a warning, a reason to run. She found nothing but exhaustion that matched her own. All right. She did not remember lying down, did not remember pulling the blanket up to her chin or closing her eyes. Only the strange relief of knowing that someone else was listening for the door, that for this one night at least she did not have to carry everything alone. Sleep came fast, dreamless, deep, the first real rest she had known in 12 days. She woke to birdsong. Just one bird. A thin voice from the trees beyond the barn testing the morning like it was not quite sure the world was safe yet. Pearl was breathing soft and slow against her ribs, her little fist curled in Clara's collar. The room was still dark, but a different kind of dark than she was used to. Warmer, softer, without the desperate edge of a house that was slowly losing its fight against winter. For a long while she did not move, just listened, just let herself exist in this moment without calculating what came next. Then she got up and crept through the house, checked each child with her fingers, counted their ribs beneath thin shirts, brushed hair back from foreheads that were warm but not fevered. Emmett stirred when she touched him, opened his eyes. "Mama, shh, go back to sleep. Where are we? Somewhere safe. For now." He looked at her with those two old eyes, the eyes of a boy who had learned not to trust safety because it always ended. For now, he repeated. She had nothing better to offer him, only the truth of what she knew, which was almost nothing at all. The stove was still going. She found Silas out near the barn, chopping wood with a hand axe. A soft layer of frost clung to the grass, and his breath came in white clouds that vanished as soon as they formed. He did not look up when she approached. "I need to work," she said. He paused. The axe hung in the air. "You don't have to yet." "I do." The axe came down one more time, split a log clean in two. Then he leaned it against the chopping block and straightened up. "You ever milk a cow?" She nodded. "Chickens need feeding. Water troughs are frozen. I'll get the kettle hot to thaw them out." He started toward the house. She followed, wrapping her coat tighter against the cold. They moved like two people long used to silence, not the uncomfortable silence of strangers. Something else. Something practical and patient. The silence of people who had learned that words were expensive and not to be wasted on things that did not matter. He showed her the chicken coop, the feed shed, where the milk cow liked to be scratched behind her ears. She set to work without asking questions, and he let her work without offering explanations. Later in the kitchen, she peeled potatoes while he mended a broken hinge. They did not talk much, but once when she asked where he had gotten the canned beans, he gave a short answer. Traded for them out by Groom. Some folks clearing out. Didn't want to stay through winter. They leave you this place too? He gave the faintest grin. First one she had seen. "No. This was mine. My daddy's before that." Something about the way he said it made her look up from the potatoes, made her pay attention to the pause between words. "You've been here long?" "Born here. Left for a while. Came back." That was all he said. But she caught the weight of that pause before came back, the weariness hidden inside it, like whatever had made him leave had not entirely let go when he returned. She wanted to ask, wanted to know what could drive a man away from the land his father had built and then bring him back again. But she did not have the right to those questions yet, might never have the right. So she kept peeling potatoes. And he kept fixing the hinge. And the silence between them stretched out thin and comfortable, like a blanket worn soft by years of use. That night, after the children slept, she sat near the fire with a needle and thread, mending a tear in Emmett's coat. Silas sat across from her, staring into the flames with an expression she could not read. "I was married 13 years, she said. Her voice came out quiet, almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire. "He was good to us, but he never prepared for the lean times. Always thought they'd pass on their own." Silas's voice was low. They usually do, but not always in time. Clara turned her face toward the window. Outside, the wind was picking up again. Another cold night, another test. "You lose things slow," she said, and then all at once. He nodded, did not try to comfort her with empty words, just sat there in the firelight and let her grief exist without trying to fix it. After a while, she noticed the pair of boots tucked in the corner, too small for a man, too big for a child. She filed the question away for another time. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people learning each other's rhythms, learning when to speak and when to let the quiet do the speaking for them. Something had shifted between them. Not big, just enough. A door cracked open that might in time swing wider. She was checking the children's blankets when she noticed the bookshelf by the window. A small collection of worn volumes, farming almanacs, a book of hymns, and tucked at the end, almost hidden behind the others, a small leather Bible with a cracked spine. She pulled it out without thinking, flipped it open. There, on the first page, written in a child's uneven hand, was a name. Samuel Holloway, age 6. Clara's breath caught. She looked toward the hallway, counted the doors. 3 stood open or ajar. 1 at the far end was closed tight. She had noticed it yesterday, but had not thought much of it. Just another room in a house full of rooms. Now she understood. That door was not closed because it was empty. It was closed because of what it held. Memories. Pain. A child's bedroom that no one had entered in years. Silas had a son, 9 years old, living somewhere far from here with a mother who had taken him away, and Silas had stayed behind, alone, on land that held nothing but ghosts and work and silence. Clara closed the Bible gently, put it back on the shelf, did not mention it when Silas came in from checking the animals, did not ask about the closed door or the child's name or the boots in the wagon that were exactly the right size for a 9-year-old boy. Some wounds were not meant to be touched. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she saw him differently now, not just as a stranger who had stopped to help, but as a man carrying his own weight of loss, his own impossible mathematics, his own calculations that never quite added up. They were the same, she realized. Broken in different ways, but broken all the same, both trying to survive a world that had taken too much and given too little in return. That night, as the fire burned down low and the children slept bundled together like a litter of fox pups, Silas stood by the window looking out into the dark. Clara stood beside him, not touching, just close enough to feel that he did not want to be alone. "Storm's coming," he said. "I can feel it in my bones." She looked out too. The sky was heavy with clouds she could not see but somehow knew were there, were waiting, building, preparing to bury the world in white. "I can feel it too," she said. They stood there together in the darkness. 2 people who had learned the hard way that survival was not a thing you did alone. 2 people who did not yet know what they were building, only that they were building it together. The storm would come. The hardest days were still ahead. But for now, in this moment, there was warmth, and there was shelter, and there was the faint, fragile possibility of something that might one day feel like home. And sometimes that was enough. On the 7th night, Colton's fever spiked. Clara woke to the sound of her own name being called. A small voice, thin and frightened, cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Mama. Mama, Colton won't wake up." She was on her feet before her mind caught up with her body. Found Nettie standing in the doorway with Pearl in her arms, both of them shaking. Colton lay on the floor near the dying fire. His body was curled into itself, trembling so hard the blankets had fallen away. His skin was the color of ash. His eyes were open but seeing nothing. Clara dropped beside him, pressed her hand to his forehead, and felt heat that should not have been possible. Heat like coal. Heat like the inside of a forge. Silas. She did not shout, did not need to. He was already there, boots on, moving through the darkness, with the certainty of a man who had faced crisis before. Get water warming, all the blankets. She did not argue, did not hesitate, just moved. They worked together through the night. Silas held Colton in a basin of warm water while Clara bathed him, trying to draw the fever out through his skin. They changed the water when it turned cold, wrapped him in fresh blankets, held him close when he shivered and further away when he burned. Emmett woke and stood in the corner of the room watching his brother with eyes that had seen too much death already. Clara wanted to send him back to bed to protect him from what might be coming, but she could not find the words. Silas spoke instead. "Go to your sisters. Keep them calm. Can you do that?" Emmett nodded. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. "Yes, sir." He went. The hours crawled by. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the wind moaned against the walls like something trying to get in. Colton's breathing grew shallow, then fast, then shallow again. His small body was fighting a war that Clara could not see, and she did not know which side was winning. She had lost children before, 2 of them, both before they could walk, both in the space of a single terrible year when drought had taken everything and left only grief behind. She had sworn she would not lose another, had promised God and herself and the empty sky that she would do whatever it took to keep the ones who remained alive. But promises meant nothing to fever, Nothing to winter. Nothing to a world that did not care how much a mother was willing to sacrifice. Near dawn, Colton went still. Clara's heart stopped. Her hands froze on his small body. She could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stare at the child who had been fighting so hard and was now lying motionless in her arms. Then he took a breath. Deep, slow. The breath of someone waking from a long sleep rather than slipping into a longer one. His fever had broken. Clara could feel it in the change of his skin, the sweat cooling on his forehead, the color returning to his cheeks. He was going to live. She did not realize she was crying until she felt the tears on her hands, hot and wet and real. The first tears she had allowed herself since Walter's funeral. The first release of everything she had been holding back for 12 endless days. Silas sat beside her on the floor. Did not speak. Did not try to comfort her with words. Just stayed there, his shoulder almost touching hers, while she cried for everything she had lost, and everything she had almost lost again. After a long time she spoke. Her voice was raw, broken. "Thank you." Silas looked at her. His gray eyes held something she had not seen before, something soft and unguarded. "You don't owe me that. Don't mean I shouldn't say it." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked down at Colton sleeping peacefully now in her lap. "He's going to be all right," she said. Not a question, a declaration, a thing she needed to believe. Silas nodded. "He's strong, like his mama." Clara almost laughed. It came out as something between a sob and a sigh. "I don't feel strong. Don't have to feel it to be it." They sat there in the gray light of morning, two broken people holding together what remained of their lives. Outside the sky was lightening. The storm had not come yet. There was still time. There was always time, Clara realized, until there wasn't. And the only thing to do was use whatever time remained as best you could. She looked at Silas, really looked at him, saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the grief carved into the set of his jaw, the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. "The man from the bank," she said. "Harlan Creedy. He told me not to come north of Shamrock." Do you know why Silas went still? His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, hardened. "Creedy," he said. The name came out flat, cold. "You know him?" Silas did not answer for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, looked out at the land that had been his father's and his father's father's before that. "He's the reason my wife left." Clara felt the words land in her chest. Heavy. Final. She wanted to ask more, wanted to know the whole story. But something in Silas's posture told her this was not the time, that there were wounds here too deep to touch, secrets that would come out only when they were ready. So she did not ask. She only watched him standing at the window silhouetted against the pale morning light and understood that Harlan Creedy was not just a banker with slicked hair and empty eyes. He was something worse, something dangerous. And whatever he had done to Silas, whatever he had taken and broken and destroyed, it was not finished yet. Clara looked down at her sleeping son, at the children bundled together near the fire, at the small, fragile life they were building in this stranger's house. She had thought she was running from death, from cold and hunger and the slow mathematics of survival. Now she wondered if she had run towards something else entirely, something that was waiting, something that would demand a reckoning. But that was a problem for another day, for now there was warmth, there was shelter. There was a man who had stopped when no one else would, and children who were alive because of his kindness. For now, that would have to be enough. Clara gathered Colton closer to her chest and let her eyes close. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight she would rest. By the third week, the children could stand without wobbling. Emmett started waking before dawn without being asked. He would pull on the boots that were still 2 sizes too big and meet Silas in the yard, trying to match the man's long stride as they walked to the barn together. The boy was not strong yet, not fully recovered from those dark days of hunger and cold, but there was pride in his shoulders now. Pride and purpose, and something that looked almost like hope. Silas never made him feel small for what he could not do. Instead, he taught him things. Small things at first. The right way to haul a feed sack without hurting your back. How to swing an axe so the blade did the work instead of your arms. How to read the sky for weather and the ground for water and the eyes of an animal for trust. Clara watched from the porch some mornings, Pearl balanced on her hip, Nettie holding her skirt. She did not smile exactly. Her face had forgotten how to do that properly. But something in her eyes softened when she saw them together. The man and the boy, working side by side like they had always belonged to each other. She had begun to change too. In the first days she moved through the house like a shadow, quiet, braced, waiting for the next blow to fall because blows always fell eventually. That was what life had taught her. That kindness was temporary, and safety was an illusion, and the only thing you could count on was the certainty that things would get worse. But the days passed, and the blows did not come. Silas did not raise his voice, did not drink himself mean the way her father used to, did not look at her with that particular hunger that some men carried, the kind that made a woman feel like prey instead of person. He just worked, ate, slept by the fire while she took the back room with the children, gave her space without making her feel abandoned. It was strange, this feeling, like standing on solid ground after years of quicksand, like breathing air that did not hurt. Clara found herself talking more, asking what needed doing, offering opinions without waiting to be asked. She helped patch the chicken wire where coyotes had torn through, mended Silas's shirts with stitches so fine you could hardly see them, organized the pantry, swept the floors, made the house feel less like a shelter and more like a home. The rough edge of her grief was still there, would always be there, she suspected. Walter's ghost lived in her bones and would not leave just because she had found a warm place to sleep. But the grief had reshaped itself into something she could carry, something that did not crush her every time she tried to stand. Late one afternoon they were standing near the corral. Silas had just finished showing Emmett how to loop a lead rope around a fence post. The boy was practicing on his own now, tongue between his teeth, determined to get it right. Clara leaned against the rail with her arms crossed. "That boy of mine," she said, "he's been quiet since before his daddy died. But you—" She paused, searching for words that would not sound too soft. "You got him looking up again." Silas adjusted the brim of his hat. His eyes stayed on Emmett. "Ain't doing much." "You are. Just not loud about it." He gave a small grunt. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "He's a good kid. They all are. Just got hollowed out." Clara nodded, watched her son finally get the rope to hold, watched him look over at Silas for approval, and watched Silas give him a single nod that meant more than any words could. Wasn't just death that hollowed them, she said. It was what came after. It usually is. They stood like that for a while, no talk, just the sound of a horse kicking at a stall and the wind whispering through the fence rails and Emmett's quiet grunts as he practiced his knots. Finally she said, "Walter always believed the land would provide, that if you worked hard enough things would turn around. He never saw the end coming." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Most folks don't. That's what makes it so hard." Clara turned and looked at him. Something in her expression changed, opened. "What about you? What did you want to be before all this?" He blinked. The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly rattling on its hinges. "Didn't think about it much. Grew up working, then married young. Thought maybe I'd have more cattle. Teach my boy how to run this place. You still could." The words hung between them. Clara watched his face carefully, saw the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Boy's in Kansas now. Don't reckon I'll see him again." Something in the way he said it closed the conversation down, not with anger, with something heavier, a door shutting on a room that held too much pain to enter. Clara did not offer comfort, did not try to fill the silence with hollow promises about time healing wounds or things working out. She knew better than that. Instead, she said, "Maybe that's why you stopped that wagon. Maybe you needed someone to take care of." He looked over at her then. Really looked. His gray eyes searched her face like he was trying to read something written there in a language he had almost forgotten. "That what you think I'm doing?" "No." She held his gaze. "I think you were just tired of letting things fall apart." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The wind picked up, tugging at Clara's dress, pushing loose hair across her face. Emmett called out that he had finally gotten the knot right. Silas turned to acknowledge the boy, and the moment passed. But something had been understood between them, something that did not need words, a recognition that they were both standing in the wreckage of lives that had not gone the way they planned, and that maybe, just maybe, there was something to be built from the broken pieces. That night, while putting the children to bed, Clara noticed something she had missed before. On the small shelf near the window, tucked behind a farming almanac and a book of hymns, was a photograph in a simple wooden frame. The frame had been turned face down, like someone had wanted to hide what it showed, but could not quite bring themselves to throw it away. She picked it up without thinking, turned it over. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and serious eyes standing beside Silas in front of the very house Clara now lived in. Between them, held in Silas's arms, was a small boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old. The boy had Silas's gray eyes and the woman's sharp chin. They looked happy, the kind of happy that came before life taught you that happiness was something you had to fight for. Clara put the photograph back, face down, the way she had found it. But later that night, when the children were asleep and the fire was burning low, she found something else. A letter tucked inside a leather notebook in the desk drawer. The handwriting was feminine, slanted to the right, the kind of script that suggested schooling and refinement. She knew she should not read it. This was not her house. These were not her secrets. But her hands moved before her conscience could stop them. The letter was short, brutal in its brevity. "Silas, I cannot stay with a man who has already died inside. The farm is killing you. This life is killing me. I have to think of Samuel now. He deserves more than watching his father disappear a little more each day. Do not come looking for us. Do not write. I need to start over, and I cannot do that with you still holding on." Ruth Clara read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it back exactly where she had found it. Her throat felt tight, her eyes burned. She had wondered what could drive a woman to leave her husband and take their child. Had wondered what kind of man Silas had been before, whether there was something dark hiding beneath the quiet competence. Now she knew. Ruth had not left because Silas was cruel. She had left because he was broken. Because the weight of this land, this life, this endless struggle against dust and drought and disappointment had taken something vital from him. She had left because she was afraid of watching him die slowly, of letting their son watch too. Clara understood that fear, had felt it herself standing in the doorway of her own dying house, watching her children fade a little more each day. There was nothing more terrifying than being trapped with someone you loved while both of you drowned. But understanding did not mean forgiving. Ruth had taken the easy way out, had left Silas alone in this empty house with nothing but ghosts and work and the relentless Texas wind, had taken his son and disappeared like they had never existed. Clara looked toward the hallway, toward the closed door at the end that she now understood led to Samuel's room, the room Silas could not enter, the room that held everything he had lost. She did not feel pity for him. Pity was useless. What she felt was something closer to recognition, the recognition of a fellow survivor, someone who had been broken in ways that could not be fixed, only endured. She went to bed that night with Ruth's words echoing in her head. A man who has already died inside. But that was not the man she saw, not anymore. The man who taught Emmett to swing an axe and held Colton through his fever and made sure there was always enough wood for the fire. That man was not dead. He was wounded, weary, worn down by years of loss and loneliness. But he was not dead, and neither was she. 2 days later, a rider came. Clara was hanging laundry behind the house when she heard the hoofbeats. Her hands froze on the clothesline. Her heart began to pound in that old familiar rhythm of fear. She had learned to listen for hoofbeats. In the years before Walter died, before everything fell apart, visitors had meant news, sometimes good, usually bad. Hoofbeats meant change, and change was rarely kind. She dried her hands on her apron and walked around to the front of the house where Silas was already standing with his axe in his hand. The rider was old, maybe 70, with a face like dried leather and eyes that had seen too much. He sat on a mule instead of a horse, his clothes patched and faded, a burlap sack slung over one shoulder. Silas relaxed when he saw who it was, set the axe against the porch rail. Ezra. The old man slid off his mule with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for half a century. Silas. He nodded. Then his eyes moved to Clara. And this must be the widow I've been hearing about. Clara stiffened. Hearing about from who? Ezra Pike was his name, the only neighbor still living within 10 miles. He had a cabin 2 ridges over a handful of goats, and according to Silas, more stubbornness than sense. He had also known Silas since the boy was in diapers, had known his father before that, had watched 3 generations of Holloways work this land and fight this weather and bury their dead in the small plot at the edge of the eastern field. "Come inside," Silas said. "Wind's picking up." They sat at the kitchen table while Clara made coffee. Ezra had brought gifts, a bag of flour, some salt, a bottle of whiskey that he and Silas passed between them while the fire crackled and the children played quietly in the corner. Clara listened more than she talked. Ezra had the kind of voice that filled a room without demanding attention, low and weathered like wood that had been sanded smooth by years of use. He told stories about Silas's father, a hard man but fair, a man who had built this ranch from nothing and defended it against droughts and rustlers and the relentless indifference of the world. He told stories about Silas as a boy, quiet even then, more comfortable with animals than people, the kind of child who would spend hours watching a hawk circle overhead trying to understand how it knew where to go. And then after the whiskey had loosened his tongue sufficiently, he told stories about Ruth. Pretty thing, Ezra said, city girl from back east. Had family in Amarillo, came out to visit one summer. Silas fell hard. Clara glanced at Silas. His face was unreadable. "She didn't belong here," Ezra continued. "Any fool could see that. But love makes fools of us all, don't it?" He took another pull from the bottle. "Weren't her fault, really. This land breaks people who weren't born to it. She tried. I'll give her that. But after the boy came, after a few bad winters in a row, she started looking for a way out. And she found one," Clara said. It was not a question. Ezra nodded. "Harlan Creedy." The name landed like a stone in still water. Silas's hand tightened around his cup. His knuckles went white. Creedy, Ezra said again. Came sniffing around when Silas was at the lowest point, crops failing, cattle dying, bank breathing down his neck. And there was Creedy whispering in Ruth's ear about how she deserved better, how Silas was going to drag her down with him. Clara thought of the letter she had found, the words Ruth had written, "A man who has already died inside." Those weren't Ruth's words, Clara realized. Those were Creedy's, planted in her mind like seeds in fertile soil, cultivated until they grew into something she believed was her own idea. "What did Creedy want?" Clara asked. Ezra laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Same thing he always wants. This land. His daddy wanted it too back when Silas's daddy was still alive. Made an offer, got refused, took it personal." The old man shook his head. "Some grudges passed down like inheritance." Clara looked at Silas. He was staring at the table, his jaw set so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. "He told her I was going to lose everything," Silas said. His voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of a man holding back something that wanted to explode. "Told her I was already lost. Said if she stayed, she'd go down with me. And the boy, too. And she believed him. She believed him because part of it was true." He looked up, then met Clara's eyes. "I was lost. For a while there, I didn't know if I was going to make it." She saw that. Creedy just gave her permission to run from it. Ezra reached across the table and gripped Silas's forearm. "That wasn't your fault, boy. Man's allowed to stumble. Doesn't give vultures the right to pick at him while he's down." Silas did not respond, but some of the tension left his shoulders. Some small piece of the weight he carried seemed to shift, to redistribute, to become slightly more bearable. Later, after Ezra had gone and the children were in bed, Clara and Silas sat together by the fire. "He's still out there," Clara said. "Creedy." Silas nodded. "And he still wants this land." Another nod. "What happens when he finds out I'm here?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped and hissed. Shadows danced across the walls. "Then he comes for you too," he said. "Tries to use you against me. Same way he used Ruth." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not quite fear. Something sharper than that. Something that felt almost like anger. "I'm not Ruth." Silas looked at her. His gray eyes held hers. "No," he said. "You're not." The storm came 3 days later. It rolled in before dawn, loud and sudden, with sleet that hammered the windows and turned the world outside into a wall of white. The roof groaned under the weight. Trees bent and creaked in the wind like old men trying not to fall. Clara lay in the dark, holding Pearl close, listening to the storm rage against the house like it had a personal vendetta. The children stirred around her. Nettie whimpered in her sleep. Emmett sat up and looked toward the window, his eyes wide. "Just a storm," Clara said. "We're safe inside." But the words felt hollow. In Texas, you were never truly safe from weather. You could only prepare and pray and hope that preparation and prayer would be enough. By morning the fire had nearly died. The air inside the house was sharp with cold. Silas had been up for hours coaxing the stove back to life, stuffing kindling in with hands that were red and cracked from splitting wood in the freezing dark. Clara came into the kitchen wrapped in the old army coat he had given her. It still smelled faintly of him, leather and wood smoke and something else she could not name. "You should have woken me," she said. "You were sleeping. Barely. Still better than nothing." She knelt beside him to help feed the larger logs into the flames. Their hands touched over the same piece of cedar, and neither of them pulled away. For a long moment they stayed like that, close enough to feel each other's breath, close enough to see the flecks of darker gray in his pale eyes, the lines of exhaustion around his mouth, the way his shoulders curved forward like he was trying to protect something vital inside his chest. When the fire caught, they stood together. The heat rose between them. Neither moved away. "You ever think about leaving Texas?" he asked. "No." Her answer came without hesitation. "Texas is cruel, but it's home." He nodded. "Me too." The children stirred in the other room, and the moment passed like a curtain falling. But something had shifted. Something small but significant. A wall coming down. A door opening. A space being made for something that neither of them was ready to name. The storm lasted 2 days. It knocked down the fence along the north side, froze the water pump solid, scattered the last of the feed sacks that Silas had stored under the lean-to. A section of the barn roof tore loose and had to be tied down with rope while the wind tried to rip it free. They worked through it together, side by side, pulling tarps over the chicken coop, hammering boards back into place, hauling water from the well 1 bucket at a time because the pump handle was locked in ice. The second morning of the storm, Emmett disappeared. Clara noticed his empty blanket first, then the open door snow already drifting across the threshold. Her heart stopped. Silas was pulling on his coat before she could speak. "I heard the calf crying last night. He went to check on it." In this, Clara's voice cracked. "He'll die out there." Silas grabbed her shoulders, looked into her eyes. "Stay with the others. Keep the fire going. I'll find him." He vanished into the white. The next 2 hours were the longest of Clara's life. She paced, prayed, held the younger children close and told them stories she did not believe. Nettie asked where Emmett was. Clara lied and said he was helping Mr. Silas. When the door finally burst open, Silas stumbled in carrying Emmett against his chest. The boy was blue-lipped and barely conscious but alive. Alive. He saved the calf. Silas said, his voice hoarse, dragged it into the lean-to all by himself, found him curled up next to it, keeping it warm. Clara pulled her son into her arms and wept. Emmett's eyes fluttered open. I couldn't let it die, Mama. It was so scared. She held him tighter. You brave, foolish boy. Don't ever do that again. But she was smiling through her tears. And when she looked up at Silas standing there covered in snow, with exhaustion carved into every line of his face, she knew something had changed between all of them. Something that could not be undone. Later that afternoon, while repairing the fence together, Clara slipped on a patch of frozen mud and went down hard. The impact knocked the breath out of her. She lay there for a moment staring up at the gray sky, snowflakes landing on her face and melting into nothing. Then Silas was there, reaching down, pulling her up. She came up laughing. The first real laugh she had allowed herself since Walter died. It burst out of her like something that had been trapped too long, surprising both of them. "Snow in your collar," Silas said. His lips twitched. "Snow everywhere," she replied, brushing at her coat. Her smile faded slowly, but something warm remained in her chest, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. That night, after the children had gone to sleep early with hot broth in their bellies, Clara sat near the fire, sewing a tear in Emmett's coat. Silas was across from her, quiet, staring into the flames with an expression she had learned to recognize. The expression of a man wrestling with things he could not say. "I don't think I said thank you," she said after a while. "Not properly." He did not look up. "You don't owe me that. Doesn't mean I shouldn't say it." She set the coat down in her lap, looked into the fire for a long moment. "I think I was near gone before you showed up, standing on the edge of something I couldn't come back from." "I know that look," he said. "Seen it once in the mirror." Neither of them moved. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, ice slid off the roof and landed with a heavy thump. "When the snow clears," she said slowly, "what happens?" Silas looked at her. His eyes held hers. "What do you want to happen?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it again. The question was too big, too honest, too dangerous. He stood, walked to the small cabinet where he kept the bottle Ezra had left, poured 2 fingers into a chipped enamel cup and handed it to her. "I used to think I'd die on this land," he said, leaning against the wall, watching her. "Now I'm not sure what I want. Just know it feels different with you here." She held the cup in both hands. Did not drink. "I've got nothing to offer you but a broken heart that's been stitched back wrong 6 different times. I'm not looking for perfect." His voice was low, steady, just true. She met his eyes, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "It scares me," she said. "Me too." And that was the first time they said anything that might have resembled love. Not with the word itself, but with everything that surrounded it. The honesty, the quiet, the kind of respect that only came from seeing another person at their weakest and staying anyway. Clara took a small sip from the cup. The whiskey burned going down, but it warmed her from the inside out. "Whatever this is," she said, "we build it slow, for the children's sake." Silas nodded. "Slow is fine. Slow is smart. And if it doesn't work, then at least we tried. Better than giving up without a fight." She almost smiled. "You don't seem like a man who gives up easy. Neither do you." The wind rattled the windows. The fire burned lower. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside this small house, something fragile and precious had taken root. It would need tending, protection, time to grow. But it was there, and for now, that was enough. The morning after the storm broke, Clara woke to silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of peace, the silence of a world that had spent its fury and was resting now exhausted beneath a blanket of white. She lay still for a moment, listening to Pearl's soft breathing beside her. The baby had grown stronger over the past weeks. Her cries were louder now, more demanding. The cries of a child who expected to be heard, who expected someone to answer. Clara rose quietly and went to the window. The world outside was transformed. The snow had covered everything, smoothing the harsh edges of fences and outbuildings, turning the gray landscape into something almost beautiful. The sun was just coming up, painting the white fields gold and pink and pale blue. For a moment she allowed herself to feel something close to wonder. Then she heard the sound. A horse, maybe more than one, coming up the road toward the house. Her heart began to pound. Her hands gripped the windowsill until her knuckles went white. But when she looked, she saw only one rider, old Ezra Pike on his mule picking his way carefully through the drifts. Behind him he was pulling a small sled loaded with supplies. Clara exhaled, let her shoulders drop, went to wake the children. By the time Ezra reached the house, Silas was outside to greet him. They spoke quietly while Clara watched from the window, trying to read their expressions, their body language, the way Silas's posture shifted from casual to alert. Something was wrong. She could see it in the tension that crept into his shoulders, in the way his hands dropped to his sides and clenched into fists, in the way he glanced toward the house, toward the window, where she stood with an expression that looked almost like fear. Ezra left a few minutes later. Silas stood watching him go until the old man disappeared over the ridge. Then he came inside. His face was stone. "What is it?" Clara asked. Silas did not answer immediately. He went to the window, looked out at the snow-covered land like he was seeing something she could not. "Creedy," he said finally. "He's been asking around. About you." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "What does he want to know everything? Where you came from? How you ended up here? Whether you've got any family that might come looking for you?" Silas turned to face her. "He knows you're here, Clara, and he's not going to leave it alone." "What does that mean?" "Means he'll come, sooner or later. Try to find something he can use, something to drive a wedge between us or force me off this land." Clara thought about Ruth, about the letter, about the words that had been planted in a desperate woman's mind until she believed they were her own. "I won't let him manipulate me." "I know. But Creedy doesn't fight fair. He finds the cracks and pries them open." Silas's jaw tightened. "He took Ruth from me that way. Convinced her I was already gone. Made her believe leaving was mercy instead of abandonment. And you think he'll try the same with me?" "I think he'll try whatever works." The children were waking now. Clara could hear Emmett's voice in the other room telling Nettie to get up, that there was snow outside and they needed to see it. She looked at Silas, at this man who had saved her children, who had given her shelter and warmth and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Then let him come," she said. Her voice was steady. "I've been lied to before. I've been abandoned before. I know what it looks like when someone's trying to tear down what you're building." She stepped closer to him. "I'm not Ruth Silas. I don't run from hard things." He studied her face for a long moment, searching for something. Doubt, maybe, or weakness, or the telltale signs of someone who was saying what he wanted to hear instead of what they actually believed. He found none of those things. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we face it together. Together." The word hung between them like a promise. Neither of them knew yet how badly that promise would be tested. Harlan Creedy arrived 4 days later. He came in a proper carriage, this time not on horseback. The carriage was black and polished, pulled by 2 matching bay horses that looked out of place against the rough Texas landscape. Behind him rode another man, younger, dressed in city clothes, carrying a leather satchel that marked him as some kind of official. A lawyer, Clara realized. Creedy had brought a lawyer. She was in the yard when they arrived, helping Emmett stack firewood. The sound of the carriage made her straighten, made her shield her eyes against the sun, made her heart begin that old familiar rhythm of dread. Silas emerged from the barn. He was holding a pitchfork, and he did not set it down. Creedy climbed out of the carriage with the careful movements of a man who was used to being watched. He was wearing a gray suit beneath a thick wool coat, and his hair was slicked back with oil that caught the light. His smile was the same as Clara remembered, wide and warm and completely false. "Mr. Holloway," he said. "Mrs. Weston." He tipped his hat to Clara. "What a pleasure to see you both." Silas did not return the greeting. "What do you want, Creedy?" The banker spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Just a friendly visit. Heard you had a rough time with the storm. Wanted to make sure everything was all right. Everything's fine. Is it?" Creedy looked around the property with an expression of exaggerated concern. "Fence is down on the north side. Saw some damage to the barn roof on my way in. Looks like you've got your hands full. Nothing I can't handle. Of course. Of course. Creedy's smile widened. You've always been a capable man, Silas. That was never the problem. The words hung in the air. Pointed. Poisonous. Clara stepped forward before she could stop herself. Mister, Creedy, was there something specific you needed? Because if not, we have work to do. Creedy turned his attention to her. His eyes moved over her face, her clothes, her worn boots and calloused hands. She could see him calculating, assessing, looking for cracks. Actually, Mrs. Weston, there is. He gestured to the man beside him. This is Mr. Patterson. He's a lawyer with the First Texas Bank. The lawyer nodded stiffly. Did not offer his hand. We've been reviewing some old documents, Creedy continued. Property records, land surveys, that sort of thing. And we found something concerning. Silas's grip tightened on the pitchfork. What kind of concerning? Creedy reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This land was purchased by your father in 1899, correct? You know it was. Indeed. And the purchase was recorded with the county, all proper and legal. Creedy unfolded the paper. Except there seems to be a problem with the original deed. A discrepancy in the signatures. A question of whether the sale was ever properly authorized. That's a lie. Is it? Creedy handed the paper to the lawyer who held it up like evidence. Our experts believe otherwise. And if they're right, well, he spread his hands. This land may not legally belong to you at all. Clara watched Silas's face go pale, watched the muscles in his jaw work as he fought to control himself. You're making this up, Silas said, trying to steal what's mine the same way you stole my wife and son. Now. Creedy's voice was smooth, patient, the voice of a man who knew he held all the cards. There's no need for accusations. We're simply following the law. If you can produce the original deed, the one your father signed when he purchased this property, then everything can be cleared up. But if you can't... He let the sentence hang. Clara understood then, understood completely. Creedy was not trying to buy the land. He was trying to steal it, using lawyers and forged documents and the weight of official procedure to take what he could not get any other way. And if Silas could not find the original deed, if he could not prove that his father's purchase was legitimate, then Creedy would win, would take the land, would leave them with nothing, just like he had left Silas with nothing when he took Ruth and Samuel. You have 30 days, Creedy said. He was smiling again, that terrible empty smile. Find the deed or vacate the property. Those are your options. He turned and walked back to his carriage. The lawyer followed. Neither of them looked back. Silas stood frozen in the yard watching them go. The pitchfork hung loose in his grip. His shoulders were slumped. His face was the face of a man who had just been punched in the gut and was still waiting for the pain to hit. Clara went to him. Silas. He did not respond. Silas, look at me. Slowly he turned. His gray eyes were dull, defeated. He's going to take everything he said, just like before, just like always. No. Clara's voice was firm. She gripped his arm, forcing him to focus on her. He's going to try. But trying isn't the same as succeeding. I don't have the deed, Clara. My father never told me where he kept it. I've looked everywhere. It's gone. Then we look again. She stepped closer to him. Every drawer, every box, every corner of every building on this property. We don't stop until we find it. And if we don't, then we fight anyway. We find another way. We don't just hand him what he wants because he's got lawyers and threats. Silas stared at her. Something shifted in his expression. Some small spark of life returning to eyes that had gone dead. Why, he asked. Why do you care so much about this land? It's not yours. Clara thought about her children, about Emmett learning to swing an axe and Nettie starting to sing again and Colton taking his first wobbly steps across the kitchen floor. She thought about the warmth of this house and the silence of the nights and the strange, fragile thing that had begun to grow between her and this broken man. Maybe it could be, she said. Ours, all of ours, but only if we fight for it. For a long moment Silas did not move, did not speak. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "We fight." That night, after the children were asleep, they began to search. Every cabinet, every drawer, every box and trunk and hidden corner of the house. Clara went through the desk where she had found Ruth's letter, careful not to disturb the painful memories hidden there. Silas climbed into the attic and came down covered in dust and cobwebs and frustration. They found old photographs, letters from relatives long dead, receipts and records and documents that told the story of 3 generations of Holloways working this land. But they did not find the deed. Where else could it be? Clara asked. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by papers, her hair falling loose from its pins, her eyes red from dust and exhaustion. Silas shook his head. "I don't know. My father was a careful man. He would have kept something that important somewhere safe, somewhere he could always find it. But he never told you where. He was supposed to." Silas's voice cracked slightly. "He was going to show me everything when I turned 21, where the deed was, where the money was hidden, all the secrets of running this place." He paused. "But he died 2 weeks before my birthday." Clara felt her heart ache for him. For the young man he had been barely an adult, suddenly responsible for a ranch and a legacy he did not fully understand. "Is there anyone else who might know?" she asked. "Someone your father trusted?" Silas thought for a moment. Then his eyes widened. "Ezra!" He was on his feet before Clara could respond, already reaching for his coat. "Ezra knew my father better than anyone. If anyone knows where that deed is hidden, it's him. He rode out that night despite the dark and the cold and Clara's protests that it could wait until morning." She watched him go, a dark shape disappearing into the darkness, and prayed that he would find what they needed. She did not sleep while he was gone. She did not sleep while he was gone. Just sat by the fire watching the flames, thinking about everything that could go wrong, about Creedy and his lawyers and his forged documents, about the children who had finally started to heal and might have to be uprooted again, about the fragile thing between her and Silas that had barely begun to take shape. Her hand drifted to her stomach. She had been sick 3 mornings in a row now, had felt the familiar tenderness, the bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. She knew what it meant, had known since the 2nd morning really, but she had not allowed herself to think about it, not with everything else falling apart around them. A baby, growing inside her while the world outside threatened to collapse. She thought about Ruth's letter, about a woman who had run because she was afraid of watching someone drown. Clara was afraid too, but she was not going to run, not now, not ever. She had too much to fight for. When Silas returned near dawn, his face told her everything she needed to know. Ezra remembered something he said. His voice was hoarse from the cold. "My father used to say that the most valuable things should be kept close to the ones you love, close to the ones who came before." Clara did not understand at first. Then it hit her. The family plot. The graves. Silas nodded. "Pa's buried next to Ma on the eastern ridge. Ezra thinks that's where he would have hidden anything truly important. Not in the house where someone could steal it. In the ground. With the ones he trusted." They went together at first light. The family cemetery was a small fenced plot on a rise overlooking the eastern fields. 4 headstones stood in a row. Silas's grandparents, his mother, his father. Silas stopped at his father's grave. The stone was simple, weathered by wind and time. Thomas James Holloway, 1857 to 1912. He built what others only dreamed of. For a long moment, Silas just stood there, looking down at the grave of the man who had given him everything and then left too soon. Clara waited beside him, did not speak, did not rush him. Finally Silas knelt down, began clearing away the snow from the base of the headstone. His fingers found the edges of a large flat stone that had been placed beside the grave. Decorative, it seemed, part of the memorial. But when he tried to lift it, it moved. Clara dropped down beside him. Together they worked the stone loose from the frozen ground. Beneath it was a hole, and in the hole was a metal box, rusted but intact, sealed against the elements. Silas opened it with shaking hands. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept them dry for decades, were papers. Old papers, legal papers. And at the top of the stack, yellow with age but perfectly legible, was the original deed to the Holloway Ranch, signed by Thomas James Holloway, witnessed by a county official, stamped with the seal of the state of Texas, dated 1899. Clara let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Silas stared at the deed like he was looking at a ghost, like he was seeing his father's hand reaching out from beyond death to save him one more time. He kept his promise, Silas said. His voice was barely a whisper. Even after all this time, he kept his promise. Clara put her hand on his shoulder. "Now we keep ours," she said. "Now we fight." They rode into Shamrock that afternoon. Silas went directly to the county clerk's office where he presented the deed and demanded that it be registered officially. The clerk, a nervous young man who clearly understood the implications of what he was seeing, made copies and stamps and records while Silas watched every movement like a hawk. From there they went to the bank. Harlan Creedy was in his office when they arrived. He looked up from his desk with that false smile already forming on his lips. Then he saw the papers in Silas's hand, and the smile died. "What is this?" Silas laid the deed on the desk. "Original document. Signed by my father in 1899. Witnessed, stamped, filed with the county as of 2 hours ago." His voice was ice. "Your forged papers mean nothing, Creedy. This land is mine, always has been, always will be." Creedy's face went pale, then red. His hands clenched into fists on the desktop. "This isn't over," he said. His voice shook with barely contained rage. "You think a piece of paper will stop me?" "No," Silas said. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. "But this might. I've sent copies of everything to the state attorney's office. Your forged documents, your threats, your harassment of a widow and her children." He paused. "If anything happens to me, to Clara, to anyone on my land, they'll know exactly who to come looking for." Creedy's eyes went wide. "You wouldn't." "I would." Silas straightened. His gray eyes were hard as steel. "My father taught me that a man protects what's his. You took my wife. You took my son. You tried to take my land." He shook his head slowly. "No more. This ends now." For a long moment Creedy said nothing, just sat there, his face twisted with fury and frustration. Then something in his expression shifted, collapsed, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured balloon. "Get out," he said. His voice was small, defeated. "Get out of my office." Silas did not smile, did not gloat, just turned and walked out with Clara beside him. Outside, the sun was setting over Shamrock. The sky was painted in shades of red and gold and deep purple. The air was cold but clean sharp with the smell of snow and sage and something that felt almost like freedom. "Is it really over?" Clara asked. Silas took a deep breath. Let it out slowly. "The land part is," he said. "Creedy won't try anything else. He's too careful for that, too concerned with his reputation. And the rest?" He looked at her. His gray eyes were soft now, warm. "The rest is just beginning." That night, after the children were asleep and the fire was burning low, Clara and Silas sat together on the porch. The stars were out, millions of them scattered across the Texas sky like diamonds spilled on black velvet. The wind had died down, and the world was silent except for the distant howl of a coyote somewhere in the hills. "I have something to tell you," Clara said. Silas looked at her, waited. She took his hand, placed it against her stomach. For a moment he did not understand. Then his eyes went wide. "You mean—" She nodded. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. "I wasn't sure until a few days ago. Everything was so chaotic I didn't want to say anything until I knew for certain." Silas stared at his hand where it rested against her, at the place where a new life was growing, a child that would belong to both of them, a future that neither of them had dared to imagine. "Clara," he said. His voice broke on her name. "I never thought. After Ruth, after Samuel." He could not finish. She leaned into him, and he put his arms around her and held her against his chest. Not like a rescue, like a homecoming. "I know," she whispered. "I know." They stayed like that for a long time, two people who had lost everything finding their way back to something worth having. Above them the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. The worst was over. But the best was just beginning. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after they had defeated Creedy. Clara was in the kitchen making bread when Silas came through the door with the mail. His face was pale. His hands trembled slightly as he held out a single envelope, cream-colored and addressed in a woman's careful script. She knew before he said anything. "It's from Ruth." Silas nodded, did not open it, just stood there staring at the envelope like it might bite him if he moved too fast. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, went to him, placed her hand on his arm. "Whatever it says, we face it together. Remember?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the letter. Clara watched his eyes move across the page, watched the color drain from his face, then return in patches of red across his cheekbones, watched his jaw tighten and his shoulders rise and fall with a breath that seemed to take everything out of him. When he finished, he handed the letter to her without a word. She read it slowly. "Silas, I know this letter comes as a surprise. We have not spoken in 3 years, and I have no right to ask anything of you. But circumstances have changed, and I find myself with no other choice. My husband Harold does not want Samuel anymore. He has 2 children of his own from a previous marriage, and he sees our son as a burden, an obstacle, a reminder of a past I was supposed to leave behind. I have tried to make it work, tried to convince Harold that Samuel is a good boy, that he deserves a place in our family. But Harold will not bend, and I cannot fight him alone. I am asking you to take Samuel, not forever necessarily, just until I can find another way, another solution. I know I have no right to ask. I know what I did to you, what I took from you. But Samuel is your son too, and he needs a father now more than ever. Please, Silas, do this one thing, not for me, for him." Ruth Clara set the letter down. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was racing through all the implications, all the complications, all the ways this could change everything. She looked at Silas. He was standing by the window staring out at the land that had nearly been taken from him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He did not turn around. "I'm thinking that 3 years ago she took my son and told me never to contact them, told me Samuel would be better off without me, that I was already dead inside and had nothing to offer him. And now she wants me to clean up the mess she made." His voice was bitter, hard, the voice of a man who had spent years burying a wound that had never truly healed. Clara went to him, stood beside him at the window. "That's Ruth's mess," she said. "But Samuel is your son. Whatever happened between you and her, that boy didn't choose any of it." Silas turned to look at her. His gray eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "If he comes here, everything changes. You understand that he'll see you and the children as replacements, as the family I built after I lost him." Maybe Clara said, "Or maybe he'll see us as people who want to know him, who want to give him a home. You don't know him, Clara. You don't know what 3 years with Ruth and Harold have done to him, what they've told him about me." "No," she agreed, "I don't. But I know what it's like to be a child who feels unwanted. I know what it's like to be passed around like a burden. And I know that every child deserves at least one person who chooses them." She put her hand on his chest over his heart. "You can be that person, Silas, if you're brave enough." He stared at her for a long moment, the struggle playing out across his face. Fear and hope and pain and longing all tangled together like roots beneath the soil. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "Write to Ruth. Tell her to send him." Samuel Holloway arrived on a gray afternoon in late February. Clara and Silas waited by the gate as the hired wagon made its way up the road from Shamrock. The children were inside under strict instructions to stay there until they were called. Clara had wanted them to meet Samuel gradually, not all at once, had wanted to give the boy time to adjust before overwhelming him with siblings he had never asked for. The wagon stopped. A thin boy climbed down from the back, a small leather suitcase in his hand. He was 9 years old, tall for his age, with brown hair that fell across his forehead and gray eyes that were exactly like his father's. He stood in the road looking at the ranch, at the house, at the two adults waiting for him. His expression was blank, guarded, the expression of a child who had learned not to expect anything good. Silas stepped forward. "Samuel." The boy looked at him, did not smile, did not move toward him. "Hello, Father." The word came out flat, cold, a formality rather than an endearment. Clara watched Silas flinch, watched him struggle to find the right words, the right approach, the right way to reach a son who had become a stranger. "This is Clara," Silas said, "and her children are inside. You'll meet them soon." Samuel's eyes moved to Clara, assessed her, dismissed her. "You replaced us," he said. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was commenting on the weather. "Mother said you would." Clara felt the words land like a slap, but she kept her face calm. "Nobody's been replaced, Samuel. There's room here for everyone." The boy said nothing, just picked up his suitcase and walked toward the house. Silas looked at Clara, his eyes full of pain. "Give him time," she said. "He's been through more than we know." The first weeks were difficult. Samuel did not speak at meals unless spoken to directly. He did not play with the other children. He spent most of his time in the room that had been prepared for him, the room that had once been his reading books he had brought from Kansas, or staring out the window at a landscape he seemed to find alien and unwelcoming. Emmett tried to befriend him, invited him to help with chores, to explore the barn, to see the new calf that had been born during the storm. Samuel refused every invitation with a polite coldness that was more cutting than outright rudeness. "He doesn't like us," Nettie said one night. She was sitting on Clara's lap, her voice small and hurt. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart." Clara stroked her daughter's hair. "He's just scared." When people are scared, sometimes they push others away. Why is he scared? Because everything he knew changed. He had to leave his mother and come to a place he doesn't remember. That would scare anyone. But we're nice to him. I know. And eventually he'll see that. We just have to be patient. But patience was hard when every attempt at connection was rebuffed, when every smile was met with stony silence, when every gesture of welcome was treated with suspicion. Silas tried too. Tried to talk to his son about the ranch, about the animals, about the land that would someday belong to him. Samuel listened without interest, answered questions with single words, made it clear through every silence that he wanted nothing to do with any of it. One night, after Samuel had excused himself from dinner without eating more than a few bites, Silas sat on the porch with his head in his hands. "I don't know how to reach him," he said. Clara sat beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. "It's like trying to hold water. Everything I do just slips through." "He's testing you," Clara said, "seeing if you'll give up on him the way he thinks everyone else has. What if I can't pass the test?" "You will." She took his hand. "Because you're not the man Ruth told him you were. You're not dead inside Silas. You're right here fighting for him. Eventually he'll see that." Silas squeezed her hand, but did not look convinced. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emmett was in the barn one afternoon struggling with a bale of hay that was too heavy for him. He had been trying to drag it across the floor to the horse stalls, but his grip kept slipping, and he was making little progress. Samuel appeared in the doorway, watched for a moment, then without a word walked over and grabbed the other end of the bale. Together they carried it to where it needed to go. "Thanks," Emmett said, slightly out of breath. Samuel shrugged, turned to leave. "Wait." Emmett's voice stopped him. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel paused, did not turn around. "Why do you hate us?" For a long moment Samuel did not respond. Then slowly he faced Emmett. "I don't hate you. You act like you do. You don't talk to us. You don't eat with us. You look at us like we're the enemy." Samuel's face tightened. Something flickered in his gray eyes. "You're not the enemy," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "You're just the proof." "Proof of what?" "That my father didn't need me." Samuel's composure cracked slightly. His voice rose. "He lost me and just got new children. Better children, ones who actually wanted to be here." Emmett stared at him. Then slowly he sat down on the hay bale they had just moved. "My father died," he said, 12 days before Mr. Silas found us." Samuel blinked. The anger in his face faltered. "We were starving," Emmett continued. "My little brother couldn't walk anymore. His legs just stopped working. My sister stopped talking. The baby was so quiet we kept checking to make sure she was still alive." His voice was steady, but his eyes were bright. "My mother was ready to die. I could see it in her face. She had given up. Why are you telling me this because you think your father replaced you?" "But he didn't." Emmett looked up at Samuel. "He saved us. We would have died without him. All of us. And every single day since then he talks about you." Samuel's face went pale. "What?" "Every night after dinner when he thinks we're asleep. He tells my mother about you. Samuel likes the color blue. Samuel would love this calf. Samuel used to sit in that chair." Emmett shook his head. "He didn't replace you. He missed you, every single day." Samuel stood frozen. His hands were clenched at his sides. His jaw was trembling. "He never came for me," he whispered. 3 years. He never even wrote. Because your mother told him not to." Emmett stood up. "My mother showed me the letter. Ruth wrote that she would move again if he tried to contact you, that she would disappear and he would never find either of you." He paused. He was scared, Samuel. Scared that trying to reach you would mean losing you forever. Samuel's composure shattered. He turned away, but not before Emmett saw the tears streaming down his face. "I thought he forgot me." Samuel's voice broke. "I thought he didn't want me anymore." Emmett walked over to him, stood beside him, not touching but close. "He wants you," he said. "We all do. You're not replacing anyone, Samuel. You're just adding to what's already here." Samuel wiped his face with his sleeve, took a shaky breath. "I don't know how to be part of a family anymore." "That's okay." Emmett's voice was gentle. "Neither did we when we first got here. But you learn. You figure it out. And we'll help you if you let us." For a long moment Samuel did not respond. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay," he said. His voice was barely audible. "I'll try." The change did not happen overnight, but it happened. Samuel started coming to meals, started answering questions with more than single words, started watching the other children with curiosity instead of resentment. One morning Clara found him in the kitchen helping Nettie reach a jar of preserves from the top shelf. "Thank you, Samuel," she said. He ducked his head, embarrassed. She couldn't reach it. "That was kind of you." He shrugged, but Clara saw the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Slowly, day by day, Samuel began to emerge from the shell he had built around himself. He helped Silas with the horses, asked questions about the ranch, about the land, about the grandfather he had never known. He let Colton follow him around the yard patiently, answering the younger boy's endless questions about everything and nothing. And one evening, sitting around the fire after dinner, he asked Silas to tell him about his mother. Not Ruth, his first mother. The grandmother he had been named for. The woman who had died when Silas was barely older than Samuel was now. Silas talked for hours about the way she used to sing while she worked, about the apple pie she made every Sunday, about the stories she told him at bedtime, stories about brave cowboys and clever foxes and children who found magic in ordinary places. Samuel listened with shining eyes. "She sounds wonderful," he said when Silas finished. She was. Silas's voice was rough with emotion. "And she would have loved you, Samuel, so much." "Father." Samuel hesitated. Then for the first time since arriving he reached out and took Silas's hand. "I'm sorry I was so angry. I didn't understand. You don't have to apologize." Silas pulled him close. "You're my son. Nothing changes that. Nothing ever could." Clara watched them embrace, felt her own eyes fill with tears. This was what healing looked like. Not a single moment of transformation, but 1,000 small steps toward each other. 1,000 choices to try again, to forgive, to believe that love was stronger than pain. She placed her hand on her stomach where the new life was growing. This child would be born into a family that had been broken and rebuilt. A family that knew the cost of loss and the value of second chances. A family that had chosen each other again and again despite everything that tried to tear them apart. It was not a perfect family, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect enough. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, like a guest who was not sure of their welcome. The last frost held on longer than usual, curling the edges of the early shoots and keeping the animals restless in their stalls. But eventually, the cold released its grip. The snow melted into the ground. The creeks began to flow again, and the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, splashes of yellow and purple against the brown. The land, that had seemed dead to Clara when she first arrived, began to soften. The cottonwoods turned from gray to pale gold to green. The wind changed its voice from harsh to gentle, a song you could hum along to if you had heard it enough times. They were busy every day. There was always something to fix, something to build, something to tend. Silas expanded the chicken coop with Emmett and Samuel working beside him, the two boys moving together now with the ease of brothers. Clara planted a vegetable garden behind the house, showing Nettie how to prepare the soil and when to water and which sprouts were vegetables and which were weeds. Colton could walk properly now. His legs had strengthened over the winter months, and though he would always have a slight limp, he could run and jump and climb with the other children. He spent most of his time chasing the barn cat, a grumpy orange tabby that tolerated his attention with the patience of a saint. Pearl was talking. Just single words at first, then two words together, then short sentences that made everyone laugh with their unexpected observations. Her first complete sentence delivered at the breakfast table one morning was, "The chicken is angry," which turned out to be entirely accurate. And Samuel. Samuel had bloomed like the wildflowers on the hills. He smiled now, laughed, told jokes that made Emmett groan and Nettie giggle. He helped Clara in the kitchen without being asked, learned to milk the cow from Silas, and appointed himself the official reader of bedtime stories for the younger children. One afternoon, Clara found him sitting on the porch with Pearl in his lap, pointing at pictures in a book and naming them in a patient voice. "Horse," he said. "Horse," Pearl repeated. "Good girl. Now what's this one, cow?" "That's right." Clara stood in the doorway watching them. Her heart felt too big for her chest. "She sounds wonderful," Samuel had said about his grandmother, and Clara thought perhaps he was right. Perhaps the grandmother he had never known was watching somehow, smiling at the boy her son had become, proud of the family they were building from broken pieces and stubborn hope. "You're good with her," Clara said. Samuel looked up, shrugged. "She's easy to be good with. She listens. She loves you." The boy's face softened. "I love her too." He paused. "I love all of them." His eyes met Clara's. "Is that okay?" Clara crossed the porch, sat down beside him. "It's more than okay, Samuel." She put her arm around his shoulders. "It's exactly how it should be." The wedding happened in April. Not a big ceremony, not a church full of strangers or a preacher in fancy robes. Just the family gathered under the old cottonwood tree beside the barn, with the spring wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and new grass. Silas wore his cleanest shirt, the one Clara had mended so many times the patches had patches. Clara wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Silas had traded for in shamrock pale blue with tiny white flowers embroidered along the hem. The children stood in a row beside them. Emmett trying very hard to look grown up. Samuel holding the worn Bible that had once held his name and now held something more. Nettie with wildflowers woven into her hair. Colton clutching Pearl's hand to keep her from wandering off. Old Ezra Pike had agreed to officiate. He stood before them with a prayer book he admitted he had not opened in 20 years, squinting at the words in the bright spring sunlight. "Dearly beloved," he began, then stopped, looked up at the small gathering, shook his head. "You know what I've known Silas since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Watched him grow up on this land. Watched him lose more than any man should have to lose." He cleared his throat. "And I've watched Clara come into his life like a storm that turned out to be a blessing. Watched her bring these children back from the edge of death and turn this empty house into a home." He closed the prayer book. I could read words someone else wrote 100 years ago about love and duty and promises, but I don't think that's what this moment needs." He looked at Silas, then at Clara. "What it needs is for you two to tell each other what you already know, what you've shown each other every single day since you found each other on that road." Silas took Clara's hands. His gray eyes were bright. "I found you when I thought I was done finding anything," he said. His voice was rough but steady. "You were carrying your children toward a town you might not have reached, ready to die trying. And I thought maybe that was why I was on that road. Maybe everything I'd lost was leading me to something I was supposed to find." He squeezed her hands. "I can't promise you easy days. This land is hard. Life is harder. But I can promise you I'll stand beside you through all of it. I'll work next to you and fight for you and love you and your children like they're my own. Because they are." He paused. "And you are mine. If you'll have me." Clara's eyes were shining. "I came here with nothing," she said. "Broken, empty, ready to give up. And you gave us shelter when anyone else would have passed us by. You fed us and warmed us and asked nothing in return." She took a breath. "I didn't come here looking for love, Silas. I came here looking for survival. But what I found was so much more. A partner, a father for my children, a man who proves every day that actions matter more than words." She smiled through her tears. "So yes, I'll have you, today and tomorrow and every day after that, as long as you'll have me." "Well then," Ezra's voice was suspiciously thick, "by the power vested in me by the state of Texas and the good Lord above, I pronounce you husband and wife." He grinned. "You may kiss your bride, Silas, before she changes her mind." The children cheered. Pearl clapped her hands without understanding why. Emmett and Samuel exchanged looks that said finally, and Silas kissed Clara under the cottonwood tree with the spring wind swirling around them and the whole world watching. It was not a grand wedding. It was not the kind of thing that would make the newspapers or live in the memories of hundreds of guests, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Summer came hot and fast the way Texas summers always did. The garden flourished. The cattle grew fat on the new grass. The children spent their days running wild across the land, building forts in the barn and swimming in the creek and coming home every evening sunburned and exhausted and happier than they had ever been. Clara grew larger as the months passed. The baby inside her was active, kicking and tumbling at all hours, making sleep difficult and walking uncomfortable. But she did not complain. This child was a gift, a promise, a sign that life could begin again even after everything had ended. Silas treated her like she was made of glass, insisted on carrying anything heavier than a plate, rubbed her swollen feet at night, woke before dawn to make sure the fire was going so she would not have to rise in a cold house. "You're going to spoil me," she told him one evening. He smiled. "That's the plan. The children help too." Samuel appointed himself Clara's official helper, fetching and carrying and making sure she always had a glass of water within reach. Emmett took over most of the heavy chores without being asked. Even Colton tried to contribute, bringing Clara flowers he picked from the field, usually with half the roots still attached. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" Nettie asked one afternoon. She was lying on the floor with her head pressed against Clara's belly, listening for signs of life. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll find out when the baby decides to come. I hope it's a girl." Nettie wrinkled her nose. "There are too many boys around here. I heard that Samuel called from the next room. You were supposed to—" The baby came in August. It started in the early hours of the morning when the sky was still dark and the house was quiet. Clara woke to a sensation she remembered from 4 previous births, a tightening that began low and spread upward, insistent and unmistakable. She lay still for a moment, timing the contractions. Then she reached over and touched Silas's shoulder. "It's time." He was awake instantly, on his feet, pulling on his boots. "I'll get Ezra. He can bring the midwife from town. There's no time for that." Clara's voice was calm. "This baby is coming fast. You'll have to help me." Silas went pale. "Clara, I don't know how to deliver a baby." "Then you'll learn." She smiled despite the pain. I'll talk you through it, but I need you here, Silas. I can't do this alone." He stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Okay. Tell me what to do." They woke the children and sent them to wait in the main room. Samuel took charge, keeping the younger ones calm and distracted, while the sounds of labor filtered through the walls. For Emmett, this was familiar. He had been 8 years old when Pearl was born, had heard his mother's cries, and felt the terror of not knowing if she would survive. But this time was different. This time there was someone else to share the fear with. "Is she going to be okay?" Nettie whispered. "She's going to be fine," Samuel said. His voice was steady, even though his hands were shaking. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years. Your mother is strong." Colton was asleep, curled up in a corner with Pearl tucked against him. The two youngest had no idea what was happening, and perhaps that was a blessing. Emmett sat by the window, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pink. "I remember when Pearl was born," he said quietly. "It was the middle of the night, just like this." My father paced back and forth outside the door, wearing a track in the floorboards. He looked so scared. Samuel moved to sit beside him. "What happened?" My mother screamed. "A lot." And then there was this other sound. Emmett smiled slightly. A different kind of crying, tiny and angry. And my father burst through the door, and I heard my mother laugh. She was exhausted, but she was laughing. And she said, "Come meet your sister." His eyes were distant, lost in the memory. It was the happiest I ever saw him. My father, I mean, holding Pearl like she was the most precious thing in the world. He didn't even care that she wasn't a boy. He just kept saying, "Look at her. Look at our girl." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I don't remember my mother," he said. "My real mother. Ruth, I mean. I remember her, but I don't remember what it felt like to be loved by her. Does that make sense?" "Yeah." Emmett nodded. "It does." "When the baby is born," Samuel said slowly, "do you think I'll be able to love it, even though it's not really my sibling?" Emmett looked at him. "You already love Colton and Nettie and Pearl," he said. "And they're not really your siblings either. Blood doesn't matter, Samuel. Family is who you choose, and you chose us." Before Samuel could respond, a new sound cut through the dawn. A baby crying. Not the weak, tentative cries of a newborn struggling to survive, but strong, lusty wails that seemed to shake the very walls. The boys looked at each other. Then they ran for the bedroom. Clara was propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Silas sat beside her, tears streaming down his face, his hand resting on the baby's tiny head. "Children," Clara said. Her voice was tired but happy. "Come meet your brother." They gathered around the bed. Nettie climbed up to sit beside Clara, peering at the baby with wide eyes. Colton was lifted up by Silas so he could see. Pearl, confused by all the commotion, simply pointed at the bundle and said, Baby Samuel hung back slightly, watching from the edge of the group. "What's his name?" Emmett asked. Clara looked at Silas. They had discussed this, had gone back and forth for months, had finally settled on something that felt right. Daniel Silas said. After Clara's grandfather. He was a quiet man who taught her how to read the sky. Daniel Holloway, Clara added. She looked up at Samuel. "Would you like to hold him?" Samuel hesitated. Then slowly he stepped forward. Clara transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the head, how to hold the small body securely. Samuel looked down at his brother. Daniel was tiny, red-faced and wrinkled, and absolutely perfect. His eyes were closed, his fists curled tight, his breathing soft and steady. "Hi," Samuel whispered. "I'm your big brother." The baby yawned. "I'm going to teach you everything." Samuel continued, how to ride, how to fish, how to avoid doing chores without getting caught. His voice cracked slightly. "And I'm going to make sure you always know you're wanted. Because you are. By all of us." He looked up at Clara and Silas. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me be part of this." Clara reached out and touched his cheek. "You were always part of this, Samuel, from the very beginning. We were just waiting for you to come home." The fall brought neighbors, not strangers exactly, People who had heard about the family at the Holloway Ranch, people who remembered Silas's father and wanted to see what had become of the land. People who were curious about the widow from Wheeler County who had walked into the middle of a blizzard and somehow stayed. They came with food, with tools, with offers of help. They raised a new section of fence in a single day, a dozen men working side by side while their wives sat on the porch with Clara and passed around plates of pie. Old Ezra came too, of course. He sat in his usual spot by the fire and told stories about the old days, about the settlers who had first broken this ground and the generations who had fought to keep it. "Your father would be proud," he told Silas one evening, "of what you've built here." Silas looked around the room, at Clara nursing Daniel by the fire, at Samuel and Emmett playing checkers at the table, at Nettie braiding Colton's hair while Pearl watched with fascination. "I think he might be," Silas said. "I hope so anyway." Ezra clapped him on the shoulder. "He is boy. Trust me on that." As fall deepened toward winter, the children made a project of their own. It was Samuel's idea, but Emmett helped design it. They worked in secret for weeks, disappearing into the barn for hours at a time, emerging covered in sawdust and splinters and refusing to say what they were doing. On the first day of November, they revealed their creation. It was a sign. A large wooden plank, carefully sanded and painted with letters, burned into the surface in uneven but legible script. Holloway Weston Ranch, established 1899, rebuilt 1935. Where the broken become whole. Clara stared at it. Her eyes filled with tears. "You made this?" Emmett nodded. "Samuel did the burning. I did the painting." Nettie picked the words. "Where the broken become whole," Nettie said proudly. "Because that's what happened to us. We were broken, and then we came here and now we're whole again." Silas lifted the sign, testing its weight. "It's perfect," he said. His voice was thick. "Let's go put it up." They walked together to the front gate. The whole family, Clara carrying Daniel, Silas carrying the sign. The children running ahead, laughing and shouting and racing each other to be first. The old gate had survived decades of wind and weather. It had welcomed Silas's grandparents when they first arrived, had marked the boundary of everything his father had built, had stood silent witness to weddings and funerals and births and losses. Now it would carry a new name, a new beginning, a new chapter in a story that stretched back generations and forward into an unknown future. Silas hung the sign carefully, making sure it was level. Then he stepped back and put his arm around Clara. "What do you think?" he asked. She leaned into him, looked at the sign, at their children, at the land that stretched out before them brown and gold in the autumn light. "I think it's exactly right," she said. And it was. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Silas sat together on the porch. The stars were out, the same stars that had shone over this land for thousands of years, the same stars that would shine long after they were gone. Daniel was in Clara's arms, sleeping soundly. His small face was peaceful, perfect, unaware of the struggles that had brought his family together or the challenges that still lay ahead. Silas held Clara's hand. His grip was warm and steady. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Clara said quietly, "for the other shoe to drop, for all of this to fall apart." Why? Because that's what always happened before. Good things didn't last. Safety was an illusion. Every time I let myself believe things would be okay, something came along and proved me wrong. Silas was quiet for a moment. "I used to feel that way too," he said. "After Ruth left, after Samuel was gone, I figured I'd used up whatever good luck I'd been given, that the rest of my life would just be work and silence and waiting to die." "What changed you?" He turned to look at her. "You showed up on that road with 4 children who were half dead and a stubbornness that wouldn't quit. And I thought maybe God or fate or whatever you want to call it was giving me another chance, one I didn't deserve but was going to take anyway." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't save you, Silas." "No." He smiled. "We saved each other. That's how it works, isn't it? broken people helping broken people, finding the pieces that fit together, building something new from the wreckage. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." They sat in silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new reasons to doubt and fear and wonder if they had made the right choices. But tonight there was peace, tonight there was family, tonight there was home, and sometimes that was everything. Months later, on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming and the children were playing in the fields, Clara stood at the edge of the family cemetery. She was alone. Silas was in the barn. The children were scattered across the ranch, their voices carrying on the wind like music. In her hands she held a small wooden cross. It was not fancy, just 2 pieces of cedar lashed together with rawhide and carved with simple words. She walked to the far corner of the plot where the newest grave had been dug, a small mound of earth barely visible beneath the grass that had begun to cover it. Walter Weston, 1902 to 1934, beloved father. Clara had asked Silas to help her move Walter's remains from the old farm. It had not been easy. The ground had been frozen and the journey long and the memories painful, but it felt right. Walter had been a good man. He deserved to rest somewhere his children could visit, somewhere he would not be alone. She knelt beside the grave. "Place the cross at its head. I brought them somewhere safe," she said quietly, "just like I promised. They're healthy now, happy, growing faster than I can keep up with." The wind rustled the grass. "Emmett still remembers you. He talks about you sometimes when he doesn't think anyone's listening. He's got your eyes, Walter, your stubbornness too." She smiled through her tears. "Nettie sings again. Did I tell you that she has the most beautiful voice? And Colton walks, now runs even. His legs healed. The doctors in Shamrock said it was a miracle, but I think it was just love. Love and warmth and time." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Pearl says words, full sentences sometimes. Her first sentence was about a chicken. You would have laughed." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I married again," she said finally. "His name is Silas. He's a good man, Walter. Not like you, but good in his own way. He takes care of us, loves us, treats your children like they're his own." She placed her hand on the grave. "I hope you don't mind. I hope you understand. I didn't forget you. I'll never forget you. But I had to keep living for them, had to build something new from what was left." The wind blew harder, carrying the scent of wildflowers and new grass. "We had a baby," she said. "A boy, Daniel. He's beautiful, Walter. You would love him." Clara stood up, brushed the dirt from her skirt. "I'll bring the children to visit," she said. "When they're ready. When I'm ready." She paused. "Thank you for loving us. Thank you for fighting as long as you could. And thank you for letting me go." She turned and walked back toward the house. Behind her, the wooden cross stood sentinel over the grave. A marker, a memory, a bridge between the life she had lost and the life she had found. Ahead of her, the ranch spread out in the morning light. The house with smoke rising from the chimney. The barn with its red paint faded but still standing. The children's voices echoing across the fields. Home. Not the home she had planned, not the home she had expected, but home nonetheless. Clara walked through the gate with its hand-painted sign, touched the letters as she passed a habit she had developed in the months since the children had made it. Holloway Weston Ranch, where the broken become whole. She smiled. They did not have much. They never would. This was Texas, and Texas was hard, and the challenges would never stop coming. But they had each other. They had this land. They had a family built from the broken pieces of 2 shattered lives, held together by stubbornness and love, and the simple belief that tomorrow could be better than today. And sometimes that was everything. Clara walked into the house where breakfast was waiting, and children were laughing, and Silas was holding Daniel by the window, showing him the sunrise. She had spent most of her life being someone's burden, someone's obligation, someone's regret. Now she was something else entirely. She was home, real home, the kind that lasted forever. The end.